This video examines how hardware choice affects performance when running DaVinci Resolve on a Windows system. In particular, we shall examine the real-world effect of GPU choice. You can use it as a buying guide or simply as an opportunity to better understand your own system. This video does not discuss the topic of Mac versus Windows. There are merits to both systems. As most people are locked to a particular architecture for other reasons, whether that be legacy, software, or simply personal preference, this video will focus purely on Windows. A common goal for editors is smooth timeline playback when effects like noise reduction or color grades are applied to a clip. People want to know what computer they need for that. Depending on the footage you work with and the effects you apply, the answer will vary from person to person. It should be noted that any reasonably spec'd modern system will be able to play back H.265 or even 12K raw footage. So it's not the media that gets you, it's typically the effects that you apply. It's worth remembering, even the most powerful system will eventually be brought to its knees and stutter. So it's not a case of if you'll experience slowdown, it's a question of when. Please remember that the best computer is the one that you have, or alternatively, the best computer is the one that you can afford. Constraints and limitations have never hurt anyone's creativity. DaVinci Resolve relies heavily on GPU compute. CPU, RAM, and other components are important, but as long as they are reasonably spec'd to match your GPU, they are not typically a bottleneck. For example, in our previous benchmark video, user-contributed scores show that Intel and AMD CPUs are equally capable of delivering similar performance with the same GPU. So a good strategy is to choose an appropriate GPU and build other components around that GPU. We have chosen to build our system using Asus ProArt. We'll talk more about component selection later. For the time being, the specs are on screen. The system has a Ryzen 9 9950X3D CPU fitted to an Asus ProArt Creator X870E motherboard with 96GB of RAM, and importantly, an Asus 5080 16GB GPU. We'll start by benchmarking this system. For more information on our free benchmark, go watch this video. A lot of people have noted that we use render speed as a metric for system performance, not timeline performance, which most people tend to care more about. Please note that render performance is representative of timeline performance, as DaVinci Resolve uses the same engine for both in the background. Within reason, a computer that renders twice as fast will be twice as performant in the edit page. If a computer can render at a speed greater than real time, then it will be able to play back at a speed greater than real time in the edit page. We use render speed as it's an easier and more objective way of measuring timeline performance. Once benchmarked, the score for our system is 220. Please remember that lower is better. This video is sponsored by Audio, who we use for all the music you hear on our channel, including the track you're hearing right now. Audio's music is made by human beings like me and you, but they have a really cool suite of AI tools like Link Match or Hands that help with things like finding the right music. They've introduced a new feature, Elements 2.0, that provides studio quality stems of every single track in their library. If you like a song but don't want the vocals, or it is instrumental but it's a little bit too busy, that's not a problem. Download all the stems with a single click and remix the song in your NLE, choosing what elements you want to keep, just like this. This feature is available in Audio's Pro subscription, which usually costs $200 a year, but with our discount code, you can get it all for a staggering $60. There's details in the description. What about the other 5000 series cards, the 5090, 5070, and 5060? How do they perform in comparison? We don't have access to them, but our friends over at Scan do. They're a UK retailer and have a specific division called 3XS that builds high-performance computers for creatives. They're the ones that built this system. Again, we'll talk more about that later. We got in touch and they kindly agreed to run our benchmark across the entire 5000 series and even some AMD GPUs. Thank you, Scan. The graph currently shows render times where lower is better. We'll convert these metrics to scores where higher is better. We're using the 5080's performance as a baseline. As expected, the 5090 is more performant and the 5070 and 5060 are considerably less performant. Scan also kindly ran Geekbench on each machine. We thought it might be interesting to see if Resolve performance correlated with synthetic benchmarks. The answer, no, it varies a lot. We suspect that that's thanks to particular GPU features that Resolve might be optimized to rely on that don't influence synthetic benchmarks. Interestingly, on Mac OS, we found that synthetic benchmarks did scale with Resolve real-world performance. In our tests, the 5090 was almost 1.5 times more performant than the 5080. but a quick examination of prices reveal that it is 2.5 times more expensive. So the next metric that we'd like to put on screen is the performance to cost ratio. Higher is better. Please keep in mind that graphics card prices do fluctuate. We used typical prices that we could find. The 5080 offers the best value. That's partly why we chose it. The 5090, however, offers the worst value. That's understandable though. It's a pretty well acknowledged fact that value decreases near the low and high end of a product's lineup. So in this case, it's excusable. If you want the best, you have to pay. On the other hand, the 5060 offers similar poor value, but also the worst performance. If you're looking for value, a 5070 is a much better choice. Let's add the 4080 and 4090 to the chart. The 5080 delivers marginally better performance than the 4090. NVIDIA advertised that when the 5000 series was released, that the new middle range option is more powerful than the previous top-end model. 4090s are no longer manufactured, but they are readily available on the second-hand market. As they both have similar performance, it begs the question, should you purchase a 4090 or a 5080? Firstly, the 5080 is better according to our tests. They are both available for a relatively similar price, but the 5080 will have a longer support life ahead of it. If you already have a 4090, there's little point upgrading to a 5080. If you're deciding between purchasing a second-hand 4090 and a 5080, we think it's a clear choice. Get the 5080. AMD Radeon is always going to be at a disadvantage in Resolve when compared to the NVIDIA GeForce. That's because Resolve has been heavily optimized for NVIDIA GPUs using the CUDA engine. In past, some features have come first to Resolve systems with NVIDIA GPUs before being supported for AMD. That said, you can still get excellent performance from AMD cards. While their performance might seem underwhelming at first, take note of their cost to performance ratio. The 9060 is by far the best value GPU you can put in your computer, and the 9070 isn't far behind value-wise. These are excellent choices for budget-conscious creatives. While GPU is primarily responsible for Resolve performance, CPUs matter too. In our tests, we've used the fastest Ryzen chipset, the 9950X3D. That was to ensure that the CPU performance was not a bottleneck when we were testing GPU performance. If you're building a budget system, there will be a threshold where your CPU affects GPU performance. Unfortunately, it's outside of the scope of this video to test different CPUs in combination with different GPUs. How much RAM do you need? We ran our benchmark twice on our system, once with 96 gigabytes of RAM, once with 48. Unfortunately, that's as granular as we could get because our 96 gigabytes is made up of only 2 memory modules. As you can see, RAM did not impact Resolve performance. Why? Firstly, because without anything else running, 48 gigabytes is probably way more than Resolve needs. Second, the speed of swap memory has dramatically improved over the years. More RAM is still helpful though, especially in the Fusion page, which is more RAM dependent for things like caching frames. But the amount of RAM is still unlikely to improve render speed on typical projects, just increase the amount of cached frames that can be stored in RAM. Either way, what we can say for sure is that beyond a certain critical threshold, additional RAM does not improve Resolve performance. As mentioned, we've built our system using Asus ProArt components. In fact, they have kindly supported this video, but they don't get to control what we say. The reality is that a 5080 produced by Asus will be incredibly similar to a 5080 produced by any other OEM. That's because of the incredibly tight control that NVIDIA exercises over manufacturers. While we have tested with Asus GPUs, you would get similar performance with others. So why would you choose to use Asus ProArt? You don't have to, but here's why we did. Asus ProArt line is designed specifically for creators like me and you. Asus makes it possible to buy all the components you need, except for storage, RAM, and CPU, from a single provider. Because of that, there's a higher probability that those components will integrate, and then if you do have problems, there's a single manufacturer that you can talk to. My primary vocation is filmmaking, not IT. The motherboard is the ProArt X870E. This motherboard has 10 gigabit and 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. That's critical for using high-speed network-attached storage like Blackmagic's cloud stores. It also has 40 gig USB 4 as well as 20 and 10. And it supports an additional GPU if ever I decide to upgrade. There's a 1000 watt Asus PSU and a ProArt 420mm AIO water cooler. Finally, this is the ProArt 602 case. It's got enough space to accommodate the 5090. We chose it specifically for the sake of testing, but if I did this again, I'd get the smaller 401 case, which fits a 5080 just fine. I didn't assemble this myself. 3XS at Scan did. They have done an incredible job. Look at how tidy this is. The build and cable runs are immaculate. They even ship the computer with their burn-in benchmarks saved to the desktop, which is handy for tracking if you're reaching your computer's full potential. There is money to be saved by assembling your own system, but it's going to take time, and you inherit all of the risk. If there's an issue with a component, it's up to you to sort. It all comes down to how much your time is in demand. For working professionals, it might be cheaper to pay someone else to assemble the computer. But again, to repeat, there's other manufacturers and retailers. We can't pretend that Asus and Scan exist in a vacuum, but as far as we're concerned, the hardware quality and experience has been excellent. We just want to take a moment to talk about the limitations of our benchmark. It exposes DaVinci Resolve to a generalized cross-section of both CPU and GPU accelerated tasks. We're not benchmarking individual card features. Certain cards have certain hardware for accelerating certain tasks, like H.265 encoding. There might be differences between the encoder found in a 5090 and a 5080 card. So for example, the 5090 might be faster at encoding H.265. I say might, this is a made-up example. But if that were the case, the extra speed would only show up in a pure encoding test. When rendering a timeline, it would be difficult to distinguish encoding gains from general rendering gains. Please take that into account. We're just benchmarking general performance. You've watched the entire video. Thank you. At the end of the day, you're probably already making awesome stuff with the computer that you have. If you're looking to make a purchase, depending on your budget and needs, there are a variety of options available that blend performance and cost with different ratios. Please feel free to use our benchmark to test your own system and post your scores in the comments. Please use the following format. We've had a fantastic experience with both Asus hardware and Scan's building service. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Consider sharing it with a friend or work colleague. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on future content, and thank you for watching.